On this Friday night, delicate diplomacy. The first face-to-face between Prime Ministers Trudeau and Modi since Canada accused India of orchestrating a Sikh activist's murder in BC.
The meeting likely was not a warm and happy one.
New urgency to Calgary's water crisis. The mayor's plea to residents and businesses. America's ban on bump stocks struck down.
They can create mass casualty events.
What's behind the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling? And they sure know the ropes.
It's just like a whole friendly sport.
The young Nova Scotians hopping, skipping, and jumping their way to gold.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. We begin with breaking news tonight. More than a week after Calgary's critical water main break, sparking pleas for people to conserve water under tight restrictions, city officials now say it'll take a few more weeks for things to return to normal. Turns out another 5 areas of the pipe need to be fixed.
Our only choice is to stay the course with our current water restrictions for 3 to 5 weeks longer and do these critical repairs now. We need to double down and get this job done.
City officials say there will be more details to come on the water conservation strategy as they repair the new deficiencies. Calgary's mayor has already warned that the city's water use has been trending upward since last Saturday. She said more restrictions could come into place if that doesn't come down. No word on what this means for the Calgary Stampede, which begins July 5th. Organizers are now working on contingency plans. Repairs on the broken pipe were supposed to be finished yesterday. It had already been delayed when 2 workers were injured Wednesday night. The second day of the G7 summit saw history being made, with the Pope addressing world leaders at the event for the first time. As the world's cameras were focused on the pontiff, Canadians were closely watching the summit's sidelines, and specifically Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as the pair met face-to-face for the first time since Trudeau publicly accused Modi's government of involvement in the assassination of a Canadian Sikh activist. Mackenzie Gray reports from southern Italy.
He's a man in demand. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the G7. Meeting with the Ukrainians, the French, the British, and after 2 awkward group meetings, Justin Trudeau for a quick handshake. The conversation, the first since the Prime Minister alleged agents of the Indian government killed Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey, BC. But it's unclear if that was discussed. Trudeau's office only saying the two had a brief discussion about their bilateral relationship.
Neither leader looks particularly pleased. We can assume that given the state of tensions in the relationship, that the meeting likely was not a warm and happy one.
Modi has denied the allegations, but 4 men have been charged for alleged involvement in the murder.
Now it's become a war of words between the 2 countries, where both sides are going to reinforce their narratives, and I don't think anything is going to change.
The Prime Minister did have a proper one-on-one meeting with the Pope, where Trudeau raised the unfulfilled promise from the Catholic Church to return stolen Indigenous artifacts. It's the first time the head of the Catholic Church has attended the G7, a coup for Italy's right-wing Prime Minister, emboldening her to push back against the rest of the leaders on abortion. Having the word removed from the summit's leader statement, a change from commitment for access to safe and legal abortions included in past years.
The host government always has a bit more control over the final language in the communique. It's no real surprise that the language has been watered down.
The next G7 will be hosted in Canada, and the Prime Minister's office announced today, Farah, that the event will take place in Kananaskis, Alberta.
Mackenzie Gray in Bari, Italy. Thank you, Mackenzie. There are heightened concerns in the Middle East as tensions between Israel and Hezbollah risk boiling over. For 3 consecutive days, the Lebanese militant group has been launching attacks on Israel's northern border. Israeli air defense systems have intercepted most of the strikes, but some have caused damage and sparked large fires. Now, tensions between the 2 neighbors have fueled fears over a wider regional conflict since the deadly October 7th attacks led by Hamas, another proxy of Iran. With the current escalation, Israel has issued more stern warnings. It will defend its borders. Crystal Gamansing reports.
Rockets, drones, and interceptions in the sky over a border monitored by the United Nations. Attacks with varying outcomes depending if the hit was launched from Lebanon or Israel.
Lebanon and Hezbollah, under the guidance of Iran, bear full responsibility to the deterioration of the security situation in the north.
Israel says its security is at risk. In just the last 72 hours, it says 16 drones with explosive devices were launched from Lebanon. On Friday, it sent a fighter jet to hit what it described as a Hezbollah terror infrastructure site. Reports from inside Lebanon say 2 women were killed in the attack and 20 injured. Strikes and counterstrikes have escalated following the death of a Hezbollah field commander earlier this week. Canada has been actively monitoring the border situation, fearing an escalation. In the days following the October 7th attacks, emergency evacuation plans were set in motion with roughly 14,000 Canadians registered as living in Lebanon. The UN has noted the recent sharp rise in fighting. In a statement last week, it urged both sides to urgently cease fire, adding these exchanges of fire could trigger a broader conflict with devastating consequences for the region. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made several visits to the northern border and back on May 28th said Israel was preparing for, quote, very strong action in the north. It's unclear if he was signaling something to come or if it was just posturing. Fears over a new front opening up are on the radar of the Biden administration. The American news site Axios is reporting that a senior advisor is being dispatched to the region and will arrive in Israel on Monday. Farah?
Crystal Command-Singh in London. Thank you, Crystal. In Russia, at least 5 people were injured when Ukrainian troops shelled a Russian community near the border with Ukraine. It happened in a residential neighborhood in Belgorod, an area prone to intense attacks. A rescue operation is still underway. About 90 countries and organizations are meeting this weekend in Switzerland for a Ukraine peace summit. Canada's among them. The big question is how to end Russia's war. President Vladimir Putin is not invited to the table, but as Mike Armstrong explains, he is still making major demands.
The first leader to arrive in Switzerland for the talks is the man in the middle. Volodymyr Zelensky touching down Friday in Zurich before heading to the venue for the 2-day summit, a resort overlooking Lake Lucerne. Now, the expectations for the meeting may be more about momentum towards peace than achieving it. The guest list is long, but it's who's not attending that's hard to miss. Ukraine didn't want Russia invited, and Switzerland agreed. The hope, Swiss officials say, is to set up the conditions for a second summit that would include Russia. Another country not attending is China. It was invited but declined, saying a peace summit should include Russia. Now, the Kremlin is calling the summit futile. Vladimir Putin Friday laid out his conditions for peace. Calling his plan simple, Putin says Russian soldiers will stop fighting if Ukraine agrees to give up 4 provinces and Crimea and abandons plans to join NATO. If Kyiv and Western countries don't agree, he says, they will be morally responsible for continuing the bloodshed. Now, Zelensky says the Russian leader isn't making a proposal, but an ultimatum. Putin's demanding more now, he says, than when the Russian occupation started.
We take that very seriously.
NATO defense ministers met Friday in Brussels, focused on support for Ukraine. Up until now, the U.S. has led the group, moving military supplies in. NATO is going to take that over. It's a safeguard in the event Donald Trump is again elected president. Putin's supposed peace proposals, meantime, were rejected outright.
He could end this today if he chose to do that. And we call upon him to do that.
The summit this weekend will take place with heavy security. The Swiss president says there's been an increase in cyber attacks aimed at disrupting the talks. She won't say who she believes is behind them. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
A Canadian Navy patrol ship is now in Cuba, just 2 days after Russian warships arrived. HMCS Margaret Brooke sailed its way into Havana Harbor this morning for the start of a 3-day visit. The Canadian forces are calling the trip a recognition of the long-standing bilateral relationship between Canada and Cuba. The U.S., meanwhile, says one of its fast attack submarines also docked on the island today at its Guantanamo naval base. The visit by 4 Russian warships on Wednesday has been characterized as routine by Moscow, Havana, and Washington. The U.S. Supreme Court has lifted a ban on bump stocks, the rapid-fire gun accessory that's used in America's deadliest mass shooting. The ruling delivers a major blow for gun safety advocates as it strikes down one of very few recent efforts by the federal government to address America's gun violence epidemic. Jackson Prosco reports.
The deadliest shooting in American history unfolded in just 11 minutes. It was 2017 when rapid, unrelenting gunfire shattered an outdoor concert in Las Vegas. More than 1,000 shots rained down on the crowd. 60 people were killed, nearly 500 wounded.
Go! Run! Keep your head down! Go!
Investigators later found the shooter's arsenal contained a dozen high-powered rifles, each modified with a device known as a bump stock, allowing for rapid automatic fire.
The rate of fire is almost indistinguishable from that of a fully automatic firearm. When firearms are equipped with bump stocks, they can create mass casualty events.
A new regulation banning bump stocks.
Within weeks, then President Donald Trump banned bump stocks, arguing they were illegal machine guns. The U.S. Supreme Court disagreed. Friday, it overturned the ban, ruling 6-3 that the government had exceeded its power.
This is not about the Second Amendment saying it is repugnant to try and ban bump stocks. This is about Congress not acting to do so. It's about the wrong actor trying to implement this restriction.
The court agreed with arguments made by a gun store owner that a bump stock is technically not a machine gun and therefore isn't banned unless Congress passes a specific law. Lawmakers in Washington have been unable to pass any new major firearms controls in years.
What the court did today is really rolling back what otherwise is important progress to be made to prevent gun violence in America.
Americans purchased more than 500,000 bump stocks in the 10-year period before the ban, and it's likely sales will once again be brisk, fueling fears of more mass shootings in America's unending epidemic of gun violence. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
More than 6 years after 17 people were killed in a mass shooting at a Florida high school, the building is being demolished. A large excavator stretched to the top floor of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. It punched its first hole in the classroom where a teacher died saving students. Explosives are not being used to avoid potential damage to neighboring buildings. The teardown is being done piece by piece, and it's expected to take several weeks. 14 students and 3 staff members were killed in the shooting rampage in 2018. And a U.S. judge has ordered the personal assets of conspiracy theorist Alex Jones to be liquidated to help pay the families of Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting victims. Jones's personal assets will be sold, but his primary home and some other belongings are exempt. He owes more than $1 billion for his false claims the mass shooting was a hoax. The judge is still deciding on a separate bankruptcy case involving Jones's media company. In 2012, a gunman killed 20 grade 1 students and 6 adults at a school in Newtown, Connecticut. Survivors of the massacre graduated high school this week. Dozens of students from Sandy Hook Elementary wore green and white pins at the ceremony to honor their fallen classmates and educators. U.S. aviation officials are investigating how titanium parts with fake records wound up in some Boeing and Airbus planes. The companies allege they were sold titanium parts with false documentation. The probe was launched when small holes were found in some parts believed to be from corrosion. The issue affects select titanium shipments from a limited set of suppliers. Boeing and Airbus both say the planes containing the parts are safe to fly, but they are being removed from new aircraft that haven't been delivered yet. Transport Canada says it's working to ensure proper management of any safety implications. The Princess of Wales says she's planning to take part in tomorrow's royal Trooping the Colour ceremony. It'll be her first public appearance since announcing her cancer diagnosis in March. Kate made the announcement on social media today and shared a new photo taken earlier this week in Windsor. She says she's making good progress through her treatment, which is expected to go on for a few more months. The princess goes on to say she's looking forward to attending the King's birthday parade this weekend and hopes to join a few public engagements over the summer. The heat is on. Coming up, the hot weather that's expected to hit millions of Canadians soon. Millions of Canadians will soon face an intense heat wave. early next week, temperatures could spike to record highs across eastern portions of the country as a heat dome settles in. Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell is tracking the weather pattern for us tonight. Anthony.
Farah, it's rather comfortable on this Friday late afternoon, and it will be throughout much of the upcoming weekend across southern Ontario and into Quebec. It is early next week that we're expecting this heat dome to build from the southern United States, expanding up the east coast. And as it builds out, several days of 30-degree temperatures are expected, and the humidity will also be a factor, with humidex readings ranging from 40 to as high as 45. Now, it is still the month of June. There are still kids in class, many schools without air conditioning, and that is the big concern next week. So this heat dome is reminiscent of what occurred in BC around the same time of year just 3 years ago in 2021. It has staying power, so it looks like it's going to peak around Wednesday and then continue into the end of the week before finally breaking down into the upcoming weekend. There is the potential across cities like Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, even Fredericton to break not just daily high temperature records, but possibly monthly June records as well. Time will tell, but definitely next week is going to be a hot one across the eastern third of North America. Farah?
All right, good to know. Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell, thank you for that. More than a year after $20 million in gold was stolen from Toronto's Pearson Airport, a former Air Canada manager is reported to be turning himself in. According to CBC News, a statement from his lawyer says Simranpreet Pansar is preparing to return to Canada, and he will surrender himself to authorities in the next few weeks. He worked at Pearson and initially assisted investigators after the crime. He quit his job and disappeared shortly after. Police believe the 31-year-old fled to India. He is among 9 suspects accused of taking part in the largest gold heist in Canadian history. Eyes on the riverbank ahead. A crocodile stalking children in Australia is tracked down. A 4th grizzly bear has been killed by a vehicle on the Trans-Canada Highway. Parks Canada confirms an older male was struck along an unfenced section of the road near the town of Field in southeastern BC. It's the 4th grizzly killed in a road accident in Yoho National Park this month. Last week, a rare white grizzly named Nakota was found dead from what Parks Canada believes were injuries sustained from a collision on the Trans-Canada Highway. Her 2 cubs were killed in a separate vehicle incident earlier that day on the same highway. Parks Canada says visitors can help reduce wildlife fatalities by reducing speeds, driving alertly, and giving wildlife space and respect. In northern Australia, a massive crocodile's reign of terror in a remote town has come to an end. The nearly 4-meter-long saltwater croc had been lurking in a river next to a town, lunging at children and adults. It even ate some pets. Police and park rangers finally shot the crocodile, and then the community cooked it up and shared a traditional feast. Next, how these young Nova Scotia jump ropers have skipped their way to gold. Edmonton hockey fans are holding on to that last bit of hope after last night's game. The Oilers have lost 3 in a row to the Florida Panthers, and now they risk being completely swept in the Stanley Cup final. Another loss tomorrow would mean the Panthers would be awarded the cup in Edmonton. The chance of totally reversing course are slim. The only team to overcome 3 straight losses in the finals, the Toronto Maple Leafs, way back in 1942. Outside of hockey, at least one team in Canada actually won top prizes already this year, and they're just kids. In Nova Scotia, a squad of skippers is taking old playground jump rope to a whole other level. They've just brought home multiple gold medals in a competitive sport that's all about what you can pull off while watching your feet. Shelley Steeves has the story.
They sure don't skip a beat. These skipping sensations in Nova Scotia have jumped far beyond schoolyard fun, bringing home multiple golds in the rather obscure sport of competitive skipping.
I had no idea that skipping competitions were a thing.
Me neither in grade 1.
Which is around the time these preteens found their passion for jump rope.
It's just like a whole friendly sport, and that's what I really like about it.
So it's a very cheerful sport.
Yeah.
But to get to this level, you literally have to jump through hoops to make it to the Nationals. A few weeks ago, these jumpers brought home 3 gold medals at the Rope Skipping Canada competition.
I really, really like double dutch.
And if you're one of those folks who struggled mastering the double rope on the playground, be prepared to be wowed. These pros take the fun and games to a whole other level.
For freestyle, you need to be able to do like footwork and stuff like that.
And those turning the ropes, just as impressive. Timing on the handles is everything.
Do you feel that pressure of it's like, okay, I got to swing these ropes right, because if I don't swing them properly, then I'm going to mess up my teammate?
Yeah.
The goal now, the world's one day.
People come up with crazy tricks all over the globe, and it's really fun to watch.
While they continue to jump high and dream big. Shelley Steeves, Global News, Lawrencetown, Nova Scotia.
And that's it for Global National for this Friday. But before we go, I wanted to share some personal news with you. I've decided to leave this amazing team and news organization. I joined Global nearly a decade ago. I was hired when I was pregnant. Same contract as my male counterpart. I'll never forget that. And since then, being part of the Global News family has been nothing short of an honor. In that time, our industry has evolved, and I've changed with it. I'm excited for new adventures, fresh opportunities in this rapidly moving media landscape. But before I sign off for the very last time, I wanted to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude to you, our devoted viewers, for entrusting me to deliver the news over all of these years. It has truly been a privilege. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.